We survived what you did, the orphan girls told the millionaire, and when they discover the truth, everyone is shocked. The silence of the Harrison construction boardroom was shattered by a bang that made everyone present jump. The tempered glass door trembled as two small, dirty figures burst into the elegant room, leaving muddy tracks on the polished marble floor. William Will Harrison, 52 years old, was leaning over the architectural plans for the new residential development when he looked up and saw something he would never forget. Two ragged girls were running toward him, the older one holding the younger's hand tightly, both with torn clothes and faces marked by tears and dirt. "You destroyed our lives," shouted the taller girl, her tangled brown hair flying as she pointed a trembling finger at Will. "Because of you, we lost everything." The room fell into absolute silence. The 5 executives present at the meeting, architects, engineers, and investors, remained paralyzed, unable to comprehend what was happening. Will felt the blood run cold in his veins as he observed the genuine desperation in the girl's dark eyes. "Security!" shouted Caroline Vance, the company's administrative manager, abruptly rising from her chair. "Call security immediately." "Wait," Will murmured, raising a hand. There was something in that look of determination mixed with terror that made him hesitate. The girl didn't just seem like a lost or confused child. There was a frightening conviction in her voice. "Do you remember us?" asked the older girl, breathing heavily. "I'm Sophia, I'm 12. This is my sister Lily, she's 4. You promised you'd take care of our house in Hope's Landing, but you lied." The name of the neighborhood hit Will like a punch to the gut. Hope's Landing. He knew that place very well, and an unpleasant feeling began to form a knot in his throat. 2 years ago, his construction company had erected a residential building in that area, a project that promised to revitalize a deteriorated part of the city. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Get out of here before I call the police." "Call them," Sophia challenged, taking a step forward. "Tell them how your construction made our house collapse. Tell them how Grandma Eleanor got all hurt and ended up in the hospital." Lily, the smaller one, remained completely silent, just watching everything with huge, frightened eyes. Her clothes were even dirtier than her sister's, and Will noticed she was tightly clutching a piece of fabric that looked like it had once been a doll. "Mr. Harrison," whispered Richard Alvarez, the civil engineer responsible for several of the company's projects. "Maybe it would be better to talk to them in private." "There's nothing to talk about," Caroline cut in, already dialing her phone. "These children are clearly disturbed or were sent by someone to cause trouble." But Will couldn't take his eyes off Sophia. There was something familiar in that thin, determined face, a hazy memory that insisted on staying at the edge of his consciousness. And the more he watched, the more an uncomfortable feeling grew in his chest. "The construction on Oakwood Street," Sophia said, as if reading his thoughts. "You built a big building with expensive apartments, but you didn't take care of the old houses next to it." Will's heart raced. Oakwood Street was the exact address of the Hope's Landing development. The project had been completed on time and within budget, an achievement he had celebrated with pride at the time. "You went there yourself," the girl continued, her voice gaining strength. "You spoke to Grandma Eleanor, promised you would help us. You said our little old house would be safe." Sophia's words began to awaken fragments of memory. Will vaguely remembered visiting some old residences near the construction site, quick conversations with residents worried about the impacts of the construction. They were meetings he had delegated to the Community Relations Department, but yes, there had been a few visits he had made himself to calm things down. "My company follows all safety regulations," he said, but his voice came out less confident than he intended. "If there was any structural problem in the area, it wasn't our responsibility." "Liar!" Sophia exploded, tears streaming down her dirty cheeks. Grandma Eleanor showed you the crack that appeared on the wall after you started digging. She called you 3 times, but you never answered. Lily let out a low whimper and hid behind her sister, as if the loud voices frightened her. Will noticed the little girl was visibly trembling, and something in his paternal instinct, long dormant, stirred uncomfortably. "Where are your parents?" he asked, trying to buy time while he processed the accusations. "Our mother left when I was little," Sophia answered with painful maturity. "We never knew our father. We only had Grandma Eleanor, and now she's in the hospital and can't speak properly because of what you did." The office seemed to have shrunk around Will. Every word from the girl hammered in his head, awakening a growing unease. He prided himself on being a responsible businessman, someone who built not just buildings, but opportunities for the community. The possibility that his company had caused suffering to an innocent family was unacceptable. "Mr. Harrison," Caroline insisted, covering the phone with her hand, "security is on its way up." "Cancel it," he said abruptly, surprising everyone in the room. "Cancel it now." "But sir," "I said cancel it." Will stood up slowly, never taking his eyes off the 2 girls. "Everyone, let's wrap up the meeting for today. We'll resume tomorrow morning." The executives exchanged confused glances, but began to gather their materials without question. Will had built his reputation on being a decisive and controlling man, someone whose orders were not debated. When they were alone, except for Caroline's reluctant presence near the door, Will approached the girls carefully. "All right," he said, trying to soften his tone. "Tell me exactly what happened." Sophia wiped her nose with her dirty sleeve and took a deep breath before she began to speak. And as her story unfolded, Will felt as if the floor was giving way beneath his feet. The story Sophia told over the next 2 hours completely transformed Will's perception of himself as a responsible businessman. Sitting in his leather armchair, he watched the girl draw on the back of a company letterhead with a pen she had found on the table as she recounted with precise detail what had happened in Hope's Landing. "The crack appeared in the 2nd week of construction," Sophia said, drawing jagged lines on the paper. "Grandma Eleanor got worried because the house was over 50 years old. She went to the construction site to talk to the man in the yellow hard hat. Do you remember his name?" Will asked, his stomach churning. "Michael something. He said he would check, but he never came back. Then Grandma tried to talk to you, but your secretary always said you were in a meeting." Caroline shifted uncomfortably by the door. As the administrative manager, she controlled Will's schedule and vaguely remembered some calls from residents complaining about the construction. At the time, she had directed all contact to the engineering department. "After 3 weeks," Sophia continued, "the crack had turned into a hole in the kitchen wall. Grandma Eleanor couldn't cook there anymore because she was afraid the ceiling would fall." Lily remained silent, sitting on the floor playing with the laces of her torn sneakers. Every so often, she would look at Will with an expression that mixed fear and curiosity, as if she couldn't decide if he was a threat or a possible savior. "On the night of September 15th, Sophia said, her voice dropping, "I woke up to a horrible noise. It sounded like a truck had crashed into our house." Will closed his eyes, trying to recall any report of structural incidents on that date. September had been a particularly busy month, with 3 projects underway simultaneously and pressure from investors to speed up the timelines. "What happened next?" he asked, though a part of him didn't want to know the answer. "The living room wall collapsed," Sophia answered simply. Grandma Eleanor was sleeping on the couch because her bedroom was next to the crack. A piece of the ceiling fell on top of her. The silence that followed was heavy. Will imagined the scene. An elderly woman buried under the rubble of her own home. 2 small girls, terrified, trying to help her in the middle of the night. "Did you call an ambulance?" he asked. "We didn't have a phone," Sophia said. I ran to Mrs. Gable's house, our neighbor. She's the one who called the hospital. And after that, Grandma Eleanor was unconscious for 3 days. When she woke up, she couldn't move her right arm properly, and her speech was slurred. The doctor said she had hit her head very hard. Will felt a rising nausea. As a businessman, he had built his reputation on the quality and safety of his projects. The possibility that a lapse by his company had resulted in serious injury to an innocent person was unacceptable. "Where have you been living since then?" he asked. Sophia hesitated before answering, looking at Lily protectively. "The social worker said they would find a family to take care of us while Grandma Eleanor recovered, but we didn't want to be away from her." "So you ran away," Will concluded. "We didn't run away. We just didn't want to go to a place where we couldn't visit her every day." Sophia's voice took on a defiant tone. "For 2 months, we slept at the hospital when the security guards let us, or in the park across the street." Caroline let out an audible gasp of discomfort. The image of 2 children living on the streets of Viridia while their grandmother recovered from injuries was too disturbing to ignore. "How did you know I was the owner of the construction company?" Will asked. "Mrs. Gable, our neighbor, had an old newspaper with your picture in it," Sophia explained. "It was an article about successful businessmen in Viridia. She recognized you as the man who came to our house promising help." The memory hit Will like a lightning bolt. He now remembered the visit to Hope's Landing 2 years ago. It had been a Saturday morning, and he had decided to personally check on the concerns of some residents about the impact of the construction. A kind, grey-haired lady had offered him coffee and shown him the cracks appearing in her simple little house. "I remember your grandmother," he admitted, his voice hoarse. "Mrs. Eleanor. She showed me the cracks, and I promised I would send someone to do a structural assessment. But no one ever came," Sophia said, not with anger in her voice, but with a deep sadness that was even more devastating. Will stood up and walked to the window, watching the city move below. Viridia was going about its normal routine, cars passing, people walking on the sidewalks, children playing in the parks. A normal life, a safe life, a life that 2 little girls had lost because of his negligence. "Mr. Harrison," Caroline said cautiously, "perhaps we should check the project records before assuming any—" "No," he cut her off, turning abruptly. "We're not checking anything. I remember the promise I made, and I know it wasn't kept." Sophia watched this exchange with interest, as if evaluating the sincerity of his words. Will noticed that the girl possessed a sharp intelligence, likely developed out of the necessity to survive in difficult circumstances. "What do you want from me?" he asked directly. "We want you to take responsibility," Sophia answered without hesitation. "We want you to pay for Grandma Eleanor's treatment and help us get a house again. And if I refuse? Then we'll tell everyone what you did. We'll go to the newspapers, the radio, the television. We'll stand outside your company's door every day until someone listens to us." Will studied Sophia's determined face and realized she wasn't bluffing. There was an impressive strength of will in that 12-year-old girl, forged by the need to protect her little sister and care for her injured grandmother. "Have you eaten today?" he asked, changing the subject. The question caught Sophia off guard. "Why? Just answer." "We had coffee at the hospital this morning," she admitted reluctantly. "A nurse gave Lily bread and milk." Will looked at Lily, who had stopped playing with her shoelaces and was watching the conversation with silent attention. The girl was visibly thin, her small arms a stark contrast to the size of the shirt she wore. "Caroline," he said to the administrative manager, "cancel all my appointments for today. But, sir, you have the meeting with the investors for the Garden Europa project at 4 o'clock. Cancel everything." His voice had a tone of finality that brooked no argument. Caroline reluctantly left the room, leaving Will alone with the 2 girls. He sat down again, this time choosing a chair closer to them, trying to seem less intimidating. "All right," he said, Let's start with the basics. You're going to take me to your grandmother at the hospital, and then we're going to sort out your situation. Are you really going to help us? Sophia asked, suspicion and hope battling in her voice. I am, Will promised, surprising himself with his own determination. But there's one condition. What is it? While I sort all this out, you're going to stay in a safe place. No more sleeping on the street or fending for yourselves. Sophia looked at Lily, who finally spoke for the first time since they had entered the office. Can we see Grandma every day? Lily's voice was small and hoarse, as if she wasn't used to speaking. Will felt something tighten in his chest, hearing that simple yet love-filled question. Every single day, he promised. Twice a day, if you want. And so, William Harrison made the decision that would completely change the course of his life, to take full responsibility for the suffering of a family he had inadvertently destroyed. The walk to Viridia General Hospital revealed a reality to Will that he had ignored during years of business success. Sophia and Lily knew every corner, every shortcut, every person who worked on the downtown streets. They greeted the popcorn vendor in the square, waved to the woman cleaning the benches, and were met with genuine smiles from shopkeepers who clearly cared about their well-being. You're well known around here, Will observed as they walked on the uneven sidewalk. When you live on the street, people know you, Sophia explained. Some help you. Others pretend you don't exist. We learned who's who. Lily held her older sister's hand tightly, her small steps trying to keep up with the adults. Will noticed she watched everything around her with intense focus, as if always assessing potential dangers or opportunities. Mr. Harrison, a voice said behind them. He turned and saw Mr. Henderson, owner of the bakery, where he used to buy special bread for important meetings. The 60-year-old man looked with curiosity at the girls beside the businessman. Henderson, how are you? Good, good. Just surprised to see you with the girls. Mr. Henderson smiled at Sophia and Lily. These two are warriors, always polite, never asked for anything, but you could see they were in need. You've known them for a long time? Will asked. About 3 months. They'd show up here early in the morning when I was opening the bakery. Sophia would always ask if I needed help carrying the flour sacks or cleaning the tables. Will looked at Sophia, who had blushed slightly. You worked for him? She didn't work, Mr. Henderson corrected before she could answer. She helped. And I always gave them a snack. A child can't go without eating. Why did you never tell me this? Will asked Sophia. Because Mr. Henderson is a good person, she replied simply. He never asked any questions. He just helped. Unlike other people who wanted to know our whole life story before giving us a glass of water. They arrived at the hospital 20 minutes later, and Will was impressed by the girls' familiarity with the place. They knew the security guards, greeted several nurses by name, and navigated the corridors with the confidence of someone who had spent a lot of time there. Grandma Eleanor is in room 237, Sophia said, guiding him down the recovery wing corridor. She's gotten a lot better in the last few weeks, but she still has trouble speaking. When they entered the room, Will felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. The woman in the bed was recognizable as the kind lady who had offered him coffee 2 years ago, but her appearance was dramatically different. Mrs. Eleanor had lost a considerable amount of weight. The right side of her face was slightly drooped, and her right arm rested motionless on the blanket. Grandma, Sophia said softly, approaching the bed. We brought someone to meet you. Mrs. Eleanor slowly opened her eyes and smiled upon seeing the girls. When her gaze turned to Will, there was a moment of confusion, followed by a gradual recognition that made her eyes widen. You are... She tried to speak, but the words came out slurred and hard to understand. She's trying to say she recognizes you, Sophia translated. Grandma has trouble forming words, but her mind is perfectly fine. Will slowly approached the bed, feeling the crushing weight of guilt. Mrs. Eleanor, I came here to apologize and to try to fix what my company did wrong. Mrs. Eleanor studied his face for a long moment, then extended her left hand, the only one that worked normally. Will took it gently, surprised by the strength of her grip. Girls, safe? She managed to ask, each word demanding visible effort. The girls are safe, he promised, and I'll make sure they stay that way. Tears began to stream down Mrs. Eleanor's face, and Will realized they were tears of relief, not anger. For months, that woman had worried about her granddaughter's fate, not knowing how to protect them from her hospital bed. Dr. Evans, a voice said behind them. Will turned to see a man in a white coat entering the room. The doctor seemed surprised to find a stranger visiting Mrs. Eleanor. Doctor, said Sophia, this is Mr. Harrison. He's going to help us. Dr. Evans observed Will with professional curiosity. Mrs. Eleanor's visitors are rare, aside from the girls. May I ask what your relationship is to the family? Will hesitated, not knowing how to explain the complex situation. My company was indirectly responsible for the accident that brought Mrs. Eleanor here. I'm here to take responsibility for her medical care. Interesting, Dr. Evans said, making notes on the chart. Mrs. Eleanor has specific medical needs. She'll require intensive physical therapy, neurological follow-up, and possibly some expensive medications for her recovery. How much does all that cost? Will asked directly. Well, the full treatment, including private physical therapy and medications not covered by standard insurance, could run about $15,000 a month. Sophia audibly gasped. It was an impossible sum for a family that had been living on the street. That's not a problem, Will said immediately. I want her to have the best treatment available. Dr. Evans raised his eyebrows. I can arrange for her transfer to a private room today, if you confirm. Confirmed? Mrs. Eleanor squeezed Will's hand tighter, trying to say something. He leaned in to hear her better. Why? She managed to whisper. It was a simple question, but heavy with meaning. Why was he helping? Why did he care? Why take responsibility for something that could have been just an accident? Because it's the right thing to do, he answered honestly, and because your family didn't deserve to go through this. As they left the hospital an hour later, Lily finally spoke for the second time that day. He seems like a good man, doesn't he, Soph? Sophia looked at Will with an expression that mixed gratitude and caution. I'm still deciding, she said, but so far, yes. Will stopped on the sidewalk in front of the hospital and knelt to be at the girl's eye level. Now we need to sort out your situation, he said. You can't keep sleeping on the street. We don't want to go to an orphanage, Sophia said quickly. I'm not talking about an orphanage. I'm talking about a safe place where you can stay while your grandmother recovers. A place where you can shower, have clean clothes, regular food, and still visit her every day. What kind of place? Sophia asked, suspicious. Will hadn't thought through the details, but an idea was forming in his mind. He owned a large house in the estates, where he had lived alone since his wife moved to Chicago 3 years ago. The house had empty rooms, a housekeeper who came twice a week, and more than enough space for 2 girls. My house, he said, surprising himself with the spontaneity of the answer. Your house. Sophia seemed genuinely shocked. Why not? I have plenty of space. And that way I can personally ensure you're safe and well cared for. Sophia and Lily looked at each other, communicating silently in the way only sisters can. What if you change your mind? Sophia asked. What if you decide we're too much work? I won't change my mind, Will promised, but I understand your concern. How about we start with a 1-week trial? If you don't feel comfortable, we'll find another solution. Lily tugged on Sophia's sleeve and whispered something in her ear. Sophia nodded and turned to Will. Lily wants to know if you have a TV and if we can watch cartoons. Will smiled for the first time all day. I have a TV, and you can watch as many cartoons as you want. Then, okay, Sophia decided. But if you try to separate us or do anything bad. If I try to do anything bad, you can leave immediately and tell everyone, he completed. Deal? Deal. As they walked toward the parking lot where Will had left his car, he couldn't help but wonder what he was getting himself into. 2 hours ago, he was a single businessman, focused only on his business. Now he was taking financial responsibility for a recovering elderly woman and bringing 2 girls to live in his house. But as frightening as the situation was, there was also something comforting about it. For the first time in years, Will felt like he was doing something truly important. Will's house in the estates was everything Sophia had imagined it would be: large, clean, and frighteningly quiet. When he opened the front door, the echo of their footsteps on the marble floor made Lily instinctively hide behind her sister. The place was so different from any environment they had known that it seemed almost unreal. "Wow," Sophia whispered, looking at the crystal chandelier in the entrance hall. "This is bigger than our whole house in Hope's Landing." "Was," Lily corrected quietly, a reminder that their house no longer existed. Will noticed the girl's discomfort and tried to make the atmosphere less intimidating. "Sorry, the house is so formal. I'm not used to having guests, especially children." "You live alone?" Sophia asked, observing the walls decorated with expensive paintings and framed photographs of Will at business events. "I do. My ex-wife moved to Chicago 3 years ago. Since then, it's just me and Mrs. Rosa, who comes to clean twice a week." Sophia studied the photographs on the wall with interest. In all of them, Will was smiling next to other well-dressed people, holding trophies or certificates, always in elegant settings. There wasn't a single photo that suggested family life or casual moments. "You don't have kids?" she asked. The question hit Will unexpectedly. "No, my ex-wife and we tried for a few years, but it never happened. Then we separated, and I focused on work." "Why did you separate?" Lily asked, speaking for the 3rd time that day. Will knelt to her level, surprised by the direct question. "Because I worked too much, and she felt lonely, and because sometimes, when people want different things out of life, it's better to go their separate ways. Like our mom did," Lily said with painful simplicity. Sophia quickly changed the subject, clearly uncomfortable with the mention of their mother. "Where are we going to sleep?" "I'll show you," Will said, guiding them up the marble staircase to the 2nd floor. "There are 3 bedrooms up here. You can choose which one you prefer." The first room he showed them had a king-size bed, dark wood furniture, and windows overlooking the back garden. The second was smaller, with a more neutral decor and a desk near the window. The third room was visibly feminine, with white furniture and pastel accents. "This was my ex-wife's," he explained, opening the door to the 3rd room. "She left most of her things when she moved." Sophia and Lily slowly entered the room, cautiously touching the bedspread. The vanity with its mirror and the decorative objects scattered on the shelves. "It's very pretty," Sophia said, "but we don't want to sleep in someone else's room." "Why not?" "Because it's not ours," Lily explained, "and because if she comes back, she'll be mad." Will realized the girls had developed an extreme caution about getting attached to things they could lose. The experience of having their home destroyed had created an instinctive wariness of any situation that might be temporary. "How about the 2nd room then?" he suggested. "You can share it, and if you want to change anything to make it more your own, that's no problem." The two sisters looked at each other again. That silent communication Will was beginning to recognize. "Can we put our things in there?" Sophia asked. "What things?" Will asked, and immediately regretted the question when he saw the girls' embarrassed expressions. "We don't have many things," Sophia admitted. "Just some clothes we managed to grab before the house collapsed, and a few of Grandma's things we saved." "Where are those things now?" "Hidden under the bridge near the hospital," Lily said, "in a plastic bag inside a shoebox." Will's heart ached at the thought of all the girls' possessions fitting into a shoebox hidden under a bridge. "We'll go get your things now," he decided, "and tomorrow we'll buy whatever else you need." "You don't have to buy us anything," Sophia said quickly. "We just need a place to stay until Grandma gets better." "Sophia," Will said gently, "you're going to be here for a while. It's normal for you to have proper clothes, school supplies, toys." "School supplies?" Sophia seemed confused. "You're not in school?" "Not since the house fell," Sophia explained. "I was in 5th grade and Lily was in pre-K, but when we started living on the street, we couldn't go to school anymore." Will realized there were more layers of responsibility than he had imagined. It wasn't just about giving the girls shelter, but about completely rebuilding their lives. 2 hours later, they returned from the bridge with the sisters' small collection of belongings. Will watched with interest as they carefully arranged their treasures in the room. A few hand-washed clothes, a moisture-damaged photo album, a teddy bear with a torn ear that clearly belonged to Lily, and a small wooden box that Sophia treated with special care. "What's in the box?" he asked. Sophia hesitated before opening it. Inside were a few simple pieces of jewelry, a wedding ring, a necklace with a heart-shaped pendant, and an antique brooch with small colored stones. "They were our mother's," Sophia explained. "Grandma saved them for us. She said when we were older we could wear them." "They're very beautiful," Will said respectfully. "Your grandmother did well to keep them safe." That night during dinner, pizza that Will had ordered because he didn't know how to cook anything appropriate for children, he watched the girls eat with an appetite that revealed months of deprivation. They were polite, always asking permission before taking another slice, and carefully wiping their mouths with napkins. "You were raised very well," he commented. "Grandma Eleanor always said that being poor is no excuse for being rude," Sophia said. "She made sure we knew how to behave properly. She seems like a very wise woman." "She is. That's why we don't understand why God let that bad thing happen to her." The theological question caught Will off guard. He himself had often wondered about justice and injustice, especially since learning the girl's story. "I can't answer that," he admitted. "But I know that sometimes bad things happen to good people, and all we can do is try to fix what's broken." After dinner, while the girls were taking a bath, the first hot bath they'd had in months, Will received a call from Caroline. "Will, we need to talk about this situation," she said without preamble. "What you're doing is dangerous for the company." "Dangerous how?" "You've taken responsibility for an accident that might not even be our fault. If this leaks to the press or the authorities, it could ruin our reputation. Caroline, 2 children were living on the street because my company destroyed their house. You don't know if it was our company that destroyed it? Old houses collapse for many reasons. You're assuming guilt based solely on the account of a 12-year-old child." Will looked up the stairs, hearing Lily's laughter coming from the bathroom. It was the first sound of genuine joy he had heard from the little girl. "Caroline, I remember the promise I made to Mrs. Eleanor. I failed this family, and now I'm going to fix it." "Will, be sensible. You can help them without taking legal responsibility. Donate money, pay for medical treatment, but don't officially admit guilt." "Guilt has already been admitted," he said, "to myself, and that's what matters. You're making a mistake that could cost the company millions. Then let it cost millions." He hung up the phone and went upstairs to check if the girls needed anything. He found them in their room, already dressed in pajamas they had bought that afternoon, the first pajamas they had owned in years. "Mr. Harrison," Sophia said, "we wanted to thank you." "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, we do. You're the first person who believed us and decided to actually help." Lily approached him and, to his surprise, gave him a quick but sincere hug. "Good night, Uncle Will," she said. "Good night, girls. If you need anything during the night, my room is just down the hall." When he went down to the living room, Will poured himself a whiskey and sat in the armchair where he used to read business reports. But that night, instead of thinking about business, he reflected on how his life had completely changed in just one day. For the first time in years, his silent house was full of life, and for the first time since his separation, he felt he was doing something that truly mattered. The next morning, Will woke up to a sound he hadn't heard in years. Children's voices whispering in the hallway. For a moment, still half asleep, he was confused, thinking he was dreaming. But when he got up and looked out his bedroom window, he saw Sophia and Lily in the backyard, watching the birds that visited the fruit trees. He got dressed quickly and went down to the kitchen, where he faced a practical problem he hadn't considered. He didn't know how to make breakfast for children. His morning routine consisted of black coffee and maybe a piece of toast, nothing suitable for two growing girls. "Good morning," Sophia said, as she and Lily entered the kitchen. "Can we help you make breakfast?" "You know how to cook?" Will asked, surprised. "Grandma Eleanor taught us. We know how to make scrambled eggs, pancakes, and coffee with milk the way kids like it." "Then you're hired." For the next half hour, Will watched in fascination as the two girls transformed his modern, underused kitchen into a cozy environment. Sophia intuitively knew where to find the utensils she needed, while Lily helped by carefully cracking eggs. "Where did you learn to work so well together?" he asked, watching how they coordinated without words. "When you only have one adult looking after you, you learn to manage," Sophia explained. "Grandma worked during the day cleaning houses, so we learned to take care of the house and each other. You took care of Lily by yourself." "Since she was 2. When Grandma went to work, I was in charge." Will realized that Sophia had lost her childhood very early, taking on responsibilities that no child her age should have. This explained the impressive maturity she showed and the protective way she treated her younger sister. After breakfast, they went to visit Mrs. Eleanor at the hospital. The woman had been moved to a private room overnight, and the difference was remarkable. Instead of the crowded, noisy ward she was in before, she now had a quiet environment, with a private nurse and modern medical equipment. "How are you feeling today?" Will asked, approaching the bed. "Better," Mrs. Eleanor managed to say, her speech still slow but clearer than the day before. "Thank you for everything." "You don't need to thank me. It's the least I can do." Dr. Evans arrived for the morning consultation and brought encouraging news. "The neurologist examined her last night," he said. "With intensive physical therapy and the new medications, there's a good chance she'll regain much of the mobility in her right arm." "And her speech?" Sophia asked anxiously. "That should also improve significantly." "Your grandmother's brain didn't suffer severe permanent damage. It was more trauma than structural damage." The girls were visibly relieved. Will realized they had carried the fear that Mrs. Eleanor would never fully recover. "How long will it take?" he asked. "With proper care, maybe 6 months for substantial recovery, a year for full recovery." When they left the hospital, Will took the girls shopping. They needed clothes, school supplies, and all the basic items that two children would normally have. But what should have been a joyful experience became a painful lesson about the psychological scars of poverty. In the clothing store, Sophia obsessively checked the prices of everything, even after Will explained that she didn't need to worry about it. Lily refused to try on clothes, afraid of getting them dirty and having to buy them. "Girls," Will said patiently. You can choose whatever you want. You don't have to worry about prices. But what if it's too expensive? Sophia asked. What if you change your mind later? I won't change my mind. You promise? I promise. Only then did they start to really look at the clothes like normal children. Lily fell in love with a pink dress with printed butterflies, while Sophia chose practical and durable clothes. At the stationery store, something similar happened. The girls were mesmerized by the variety of school supplies, but hesitated to choose anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. Can I have these colored pencils? Lily asked, holding a small box with 12 colors. You can have the big one too, Will said, pointing to a box with 72 colors. But I don't need that many colors, she protested. What if you want to draw a sunset or the garden at home? You might need many different colors. The simple logic convinced Lily, and she hugged the large box as if it were a treasure. During lunch at a family restaurant, Will received a call from Richard Alvarez, the company's civil engineer. Will, I need to talk to you about the Hope's Landing project, Richard said, his voice tense. I found some problems in the reports. What kind of problems? I'd rather talk in person. Can you come to the office this afternoon? I can. What time? At 3, and Will. Bring only the original project file. Don't mention this conversation to anyone yet. Richard's mysterious tone left Will uneasy. He looked at the girls who were eating ice cream and chatting excitedly about their new school supplies and wondered what new complication was arising. In the afternoon, after leaving the girls safely at home with Mrs. Rosa, who had agreed to come for extra hours, Will went to the construction company's office. He found Richard in the file room, surrounded by blueprints, reports, and documents scattered across several tables. What did you find? Will asked. Richard took a deep breath before answering. Remember Michael Torres? The engineer who supervised the project, of course I remember. He forged safety reports. The words hit Will like a lightning bolt. What do you mean, forged? Look here, Richard said, showing 2 documents side by side. This is the report Michael submitted, saying he checked the stability of the soil and neighboring buildings. And this here is the actual report from the geologist we hired. Will compared the documents and immediately saw the discrepancies. Michael's report indicated stable soil and no risk to adjacent buildings. The geologist's report warned of unstable soil and recommended special precautions to protect nearby structures. Why would Michael do that? Will asked, his stomach churning. Because following the geologist's recommendations would have increased costs by almost 40%. We would have had to lay deeper foundations, install containment systems, monitor the neighboring houses. And he decided to save that money by omitting information? It seems so, and there's more. Richard showed another document. Michael also changed material specifications. Instead of the concrete specified in the original project, he authorized a cheaper, less resistant type. Will sat down heavily in a chair. Each revelation made the situation more serious. It hadn't just been negligence, it had been a conscious decision to cut costs dangerously. Where is Michael now? He moved to New York 6 months ago. He's working for a big construction firm there. Does he know we've found this out? Not yet. But Will, there's something else you need to know. Richard hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Just say it, Will insisted. I found emails between Michael and Caroline discussing the cost cuts. She was pressuring him to reduce expenses, and he was reporting the measures he was taking. The world seemed to spin around Will. Caroline, his trusted administrative manager, had been involved in the decisions that led to the collapse of Mrs. Eleanor's house. Did Caroline know about the risks? He asked, his voice hoarse. From the emails, it seemed so, at least partially. Will looked out the office window, watching the city of Viridia go about its normal routine below. People walking, cars passing, life happening as if nothing had changed. But for him, everything had changed. Discovering that his own company had knowingly put people at risk for financial reasons made him feel physically ill. "What do we do now?" Richard asked. "Now," Will said, standing up with new determination, "we're going to confront Caroline and find out exactly what she knew. And then we're going to decide how to fix this mess." When he returned home that night, he found Sophia and Lily watching cartoons in the living room, surrounded by their new school supplies. They seemed so normal, so happy, that he almost managed to momentarily forget the weight of the day's discoveries. "How was your day?" Sophia asked, noticing his worried expression. "It was complicated," he admitted, "but seeing you two here, safe and happy, makes it all worth it." That night, while the girls slept, Will stayed up late, planning how to confront Caroline the next day. He knew this conversation would change everything again, and he wasn't sure if he was prepared for the consequences. The confrontation with Caroline took place the next morning in an empty meeting room at the construction company. Will had arrived early, spread all the documents Richard had found across the table, and waited for her to arrive for her normal workday. When Caroline entered the office at 8 o'clock, as she had always done for 15 years, he immediately called her in for a private conversation. "Sit down, Caroline," he said, pointing to the chair opposite the paper-covered table. Caroline looked at the documents with an expression that quickly changed from confusion to recognition, and finally to something that looked like fear. "Will, I can explain." "I'm sure you can. And that's exactly what you're going to do now." He placed the printed emails between her and Michael Torres in front of her, highlighting the parts where they specifically discussed cost cuts on the Hope's Landing project. "We need to reduce expenses by at least 30%, Will read aloud. "The client is pushing for faster delivery and lower costs. Find creative ways to speed up the process. This email is yours, Caroline." "Yes, but..." And here is Michael's response. "I can save a lot by skipping some soil analysis steps and using alternative materials. I'll send modified reports so as not to raise suspicion." And you replied, "Perfect. Just make sure everything looks appropriate on paper." Caroline covered her face with her hands. For 15 years working for Will, she had been an exemplary employee, responsible for turning the small construction company he inherited from his father into a prosperous business. Her efficiency in cutting unnecessary costs had been fundamental to the company's financial success. "Will, you have to understand the context," she finally said, removing her hands from her face. "We were facing brutal competition. 3 large companies had come to Viridia, offering prices that barely covered basic costs. If we didn't find ways to save, we were going to lose all our contracts. So you decided to save on people's safety." "I decided to save where I thought it was possible, without compromising anything important. Michael assured me the modifications were safe." "Caroline, you saw the original geologist reports. You knew the risks. I saw technical reports that I don't fully understand. I trusted Michael's expertise to interpret whether the risks were real or just excessive precautions." Will studied Caroline's face, trying to determine if she was being sincere or trying to minimize her guilt. He had known this woman for 15 years, had trusted her with his company's finances, had considered her one of the most upstanding people he knew. "Even if you didn't fully understand the technical reports," he said, "you understood perfectly that you were asking Michael to cut costs in safety areas." "Yes," she admitted quietly, "but I didn't think. I never imagined it could result in something so serious." A family lost their home, Caroline. An elderly woman was seriously injured. 2 children spent months living on the street. "I know. and I feel horrible about it. But at the time, it just seemed like a matter of resource optimization. Will stood up and walked to the window, watching the construction site of a new company project across the street. Dozens of workers moved among machines and materials, building something that would be a home for other families. The responsibility he carried as a businessman had never been so clear to him. "What do you want me to do?" Caroline asked. "How can I help fix this?" "I want you to prepare a full report of all the questionable financial decisions we've made in the last 3 years. I want to know about every project where we cut costs in a similar way. This could legally compromise the entire company." "The company is already compromised, Caroline. The question now is whether we face this with honesty or continue trying to hide it." Caroline was silent for a long moment, processing the implications of what he was asking. "And then, after we have this complete report, then we'll do what should have been done from the beginning. We'll properly compensate all affected families, take public responsibility for the mistakes, and ensure this never happens again. This could bankrupt the company. Then let's go bankrupt. I'd rather go bankrupt doing the right thing than continue to prosper, built on the suffering of innocent people." At that moment, the door to the room opened and Richard entered, looking agitated. "Will, sorry to interrupt, but we have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "Michael Torres is here. He arrived early this morning by bus from New York. He's in the reception area, saying he needs to talk to you urgently." Will and Caroline looked at each other. Michael's sudden appearance couldn't be a coincidence. "Did he say what he wants?" Will asked. "No, just that it's about the Hope's Landing project, and that it's urgent." 15 minutes later, Michael Torres entered the meeting room. The 38-year-old engineer seemed to have aged considerably in the 6 months since he had left Viridia. He was thinner, had deep, dark circles under his eyes, and his clothes suggested he had traveled overnight. "Will," he said without preamble, "I heard you're taking care of the girls whose house collapsed in Hope's Landing." "How did you know that?" Will asked, immediately on alert. "Viridia is a small town. News travels fast, and I need to tell you the truth about what happened on that project." "We've already discovered the truth, Michael. We found the reports you falsified." Michael seemed both relieved and terrified. "So you know I omitted the safety recommendations." "We know. The question is, why?" Michael looked at Caroline, who avoided his gaze. "Because I was being pressured to cut costs. Because my job depended on delivering the project within the reduced budget. And because..." He hesitated. "Because I was going through personal financial problems and needed the bonus I would get for saving money on the project." "What financial problems?" Will asked. "My daughter needed expensive surgery. The insurance didn't cover it. And I didn't have the money. The bonus you offered for projects that came in under budget would have been exactly what I needed." Will felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. He vaguely remembered implementing a bonus system for engineers who managed to save costs on their projects. At the time, it had seemed like a smart way to incentivize efficiency. "Did my daughter have the surgery?" he asked. "She did, and she's fine, but the cost of that. The cost was Mrs. Eleanor's house and the suffering of those girls." "Why are you here, Michael? Why did you come back to tell this now?" Michael took a deep breath before answering. "Because I can't live with this anymore. For the last 6 months, I've had nightmares every night. I imagine an elderly woman buried under the rubble of her house, scared children with nowhere to go. I lost my job in New York because I couldn't concentrate on my work." "You lost your job?" "Yes. They found out I had falsified reports on previous projects. Apparently, after I started doing it here, it became a habit. My reputation as an engineer is destroyed." Caroline finally spoke up. "Michael, I'm so sorry for all of this. I never wanted it to get to this point. I know, Caroline. You're not a bad person. None of us are. But we made bad decisions under pressure, and now innocent people are paying for it. Will sat down again, the weight of the situation becoming even heavier with each revelation. It wasn't just a matter of corporate negligence. It was an entire system of incentives and pressures that had led decent people to make questionable decisions. "What do you want, Michael?" he asked. "I want to help fix this. I want to testify publicly about what we did wrong. I want to contribute financially to repair the damage, even if what I can offer is little." "And why should I trust you? You falsified reports. You lied for months. Because I have nothing left to lose. Because my conscience won't leave me alone. And because maybe, if I help do the right thing now, I can sleep peacefully again." At that moment, Will's cell phone rang. It was a call from the hospital. "Mr. Harrison," said Dr. Evans' voice, "I need you to come here, Mrs. Eleanor is asking to speak with you urgently." "Did something happen?" "No, nothing serious, but she said she remembered something important about the day the house collapsed, and she only wants to tell you." Will looked at Michael and Carolyn, two employees he had trusted and who had failed him in different ways, but who now seemed genuinely sorry and willing to help. "Let's all go to the hospital," he decided. "If we're going to fix this situation, we're going to do it completely. Mrs. Eleanor deserves to hear the truth from all of us." Mrs. Eleanor's private room was quiet when Will, Caroline, and Michael arrived at the hospital. The woman was sitting up in bed, propped by pillows, with a more alert expression than any of them had seen since the accident. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes shone with a determination that surprised the visitors. "Mrs. Eleanor," Will said, approaching the bed, "how are you feeling?" "Better," she replied, her speech still a bit slow but much clearer. "Physical therapy is helping, but that's not why I asked you to come." She looked directly at Michael, who became visibly uncomfortable under her penetrating gaze. "You," she said, pointing a trembling finger at him. "I remember you." Michael swallowed hard. "Ma'am, you came to my house 3 days before the collapse." The silence that followed was as heavy as lead. Will looked at Michael in surprise. "You went to her house?" he asked. Yes," Michael admitted reluctantly. "I went to check the cracks she had reported." "And what? Did you tell me?" Mrs. Eleanor asked, her eyes fixed on Michael. Michael looked at the floor before answering. "I said the cracks weren't serious, that they were just the natural settling of an old house." "Lies," Mrs. Eleanor said with surprising force. "You saw the big cracks. You saw the ceiling sagging, and you said it was normal." "Mrs. Eleanor, I'm so sorry. It's not over," she interrupted. "You took pictures of the cracks, lots of pictures, and you said you would send someone to fix it." Will turned to Michael. "You took pictures?" "Yes." "Where are those pictures?" I deleted them." "Why?" Michael took a deep breath before answering. "Because they clearly showed that the house's structure was compromised. If anyone saw those photos, it would be obvious we knew about the danger and did nothing." Mrs. Eleanor continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "After you left, I called 3 times. The company. I spoke with the lady at the reception." Caroline shifted uncomfortably. "You spoke with me a few times, I remember. And what did you say to me?" Caroline hesitated before answering. "I said the technical department had noted your concern and would be in touch when necessary." "But you never got in touch," Mrs. Eleanor said. "Well, no, We didn't. Why not? Because, Caroline said in a choked voice, because we thought you were being overly concerned. Old houses always have cracks. Mrs. Eleanor then looked at Will. And you, Mr. Harrison, when you came to my house, what did you promise? Will closed his eyes, clearly remembering that Saturday morning 2 years ago. I promised I would send someone to do a full structural assessment, and that if there were risks, I would cover the costs of reinforcement or temporary relocation. That's right, and I believed you. Mrs. Eleanor's words hit Will like daggers. The trust that woman had placed in him, the faith she had in his promise, and how he had completely failed her. Mrs. Eleanor, he said, his voice hoarse with emotion, I failed you in every possible way. I have no excuses. I don't want the excuses, she replied. I want this to never happen to another family. And it won't, he promised. I'm going to make changes at the company. I'm going to implement strict safety protocols. I'm not finished yet. Mrs. Eleanor interrupted again. She gestured for Dr. Evans, who had remained silent by the door, to come closer. Doctor, and can you tell them about the other families? Dr. Evans looked uncomfortably at the group. Mrs. Eleanor, maybe it's better. Speak, she insisted. Well, Dr. Evans said hesitantly, in the last 2 years, we've handled a few cases similar to Mrs. Eleanor's, families who lost their homes in collapses or had injuries related to structural problems. How many cases? Will asked, feeling his blood run cold. 6 families, all from neighborhoods where Harrison Construction carried out projects in the last 3 years. The floor seemed to disappear from under Will's feet. It hadn't just been Mrs. Eleanor's house. It had been a pattern, a sequence of negligences that had destroyed the lives of multiple families. Why did no one ever connect these cases to my company? He asked. Because, Dr. Evans explained, the affected families were all low income. They didn't have the resources to hire lawyers or conduct investigations. They assumed they were just unfortunate accidents. And because, Mrs. Eleanor added, some of those families received money to stay quiet. Will looked at Caroline in horror. You paid families not to talk about structural accidents? They were. They were small out-of-court settlements, Caroline stammered. When families approached the company claiming damages, I offered modest compensations in exchange for them not suing. I thought I was protecting the company from fraudulent lawsuits. Fraudulent, Will exploded. You were paying families to hide evidence of our negligence. At that moment, the room door opened, and Sophia ran in, followed by Lily and a nurse trying to catch them. Grandma! Sophia shouted, stopping abruptly when she saw all the adults in the room with tense expressions. Sorry, I didn't know you had visitors. No problem, Mrs. Eleanor said, extending her left arm to welcome her granddaughters. Come. Here. The girls approached the bed, but Sophia looked curiously at Michael, whom she had never seen before. Who is he? She asked directly. Will hesitated, not knowing how to explain the complex situation to a 12-year-old. He's an employee of the company that built the building near our house, he finally said. Sophia studied Michael's face with the intensity only children possess. Are you the man Grandma said came to our house before it fell? Michael nodded miserably. I am. And why didn't you help when you saw our house was in trouble? Sophia's simple, direct question cut through all the complex justifications and explanations the adults had offered. In the end, it came down to this. Why hadn't he helped when he saw a family was in danger? Because, Michael said, kneeling to her level, because I was more worried about my own problems than your safety. And that was wrong. Very wrong. And now? Sophia asked. What are you going to do to fix it? I'm going to do everything I can. I'm going to help Mr. Harrison make sure other families don't go through what you went through. Lily, who had remained silent, approached Michael and watched him attentively. You're crying, she observed. Indeed, tears were streaming down Michael's face. I am, because I feel very sad about what we did to your family. It's okay, Lily said simply. Sometimes when we do something wrong, we get sad, but then we can try to fix it. Lily's innocent wisdom created a reflective silence in the room. Will looked around at Mrs. Eleanor in the hospital bed, at Caroline and Michael burdened with guilt, at the two girls who had shown a capacity for forgiveness that none of the adults possessed. Mrs. Eleanor, he said finally, you're right. This can't happen to other families. I will take steps to ensure it doesn't. What? Steps? I'm going to hire an independent company to inspect all the projects we've carried out in the last 5 years. I'm going to locate all the affected families and offer adequate compensation. And I'm going to completely overhaul the company's safety protocols. And if that bankrupts your company. Will looked at Sophia and Lily, two girls who had lost everything because of his negligence, but who could still smile and show compassion. Then let's go bankrupt. Some things are more important than financial success. Mrs. Eleanor smiled for the first time since she had been hospitalized. Now you are talking like a real man, she said. When they left the hospital 2 hours later, leaving the girls visiting Mrs. Eleanor, Will turned to Caroline and Michael. Tomorrow we start fixing all of this. Caroline, I want you to prepare a complete list of all the families who received out-of-court settlements. Michael, I want you to help me identify all the projects where we cut costs dangerously. And what if we discover the problems are bigger than we imagined? Caroline asked. Then we'll face bigger problems than we imagined, Will replied. But we'll face them as it should have been done from the beginning, with total honesty. The following week was the most difficult of Will's career. With Michael's help and Caroline's reluctant cooperation, he began to systematically map out all the families that had been affected by Harrison Construction's negligent practices. What he discovered was even worse than he had imagined. On Monday, they located the Santos family, whose backyard had collapsed after the construction of the Primavera building, swallowing the vegetable garden that was the housewife's source of income. Caroline had paid $3,000 for them not to sue the company. On Tuesday, they found the records of the Oliveira family, whose side wall had completely cracked after the excavations for the Villa Rica condominium. The out-of-court settlement had been $5,000. On Wednesday, they discovered the most serious case after Mrs. Eleanor's. The Perez family had partially lost the roof of their house when excessive vibrations from the construction machines caused structural damage. The family's youngest daughter, only 6 years old, had been hit by falling tiles and was left with a permanent scar on her forehead. The settlement had been $8,000. My God, Will murmured when Michael showed him the photos he had secretly taken of the injured girl. A child was hurt, and we paid $8,000 for the family to keep quiet. At the time, I was told it was an unavoidable accident, Caroline said defensively, that these things happen on construction sites. Caroline, look at this picture. Look at this child's face. The photo showed a small girl with a large bandage on her forehead, her big eyes filled with fear and confusion. It was an image that would haunt Will for the rest of his life. Where is this family now? He asked. According to our records, they moved to Easton a year ago, Michael replied. The father got a job at a factory there. Find their address. I'm going to personally apologize and offer adequate compensation. Will, Caroline said carefully, if you do this with all the families, the company will go bankrupt in 2 months. Then we'll go bankrupt in 2 months. And the employees? What about the families that depend on the company's jobs? Are you going to destroy the lives of 30 families to compensate 6? It was an ethical dilemma Will hadn't fully considered. Harrison Construction employed 32 people, many of them with young children and financial responsibilities. If the company went bankrupt, dozens of other families would be affected. "Is there any way we can make the repairs without going bankrupt?" he asked Michael. "Maybe," the engineer said, studying the company's financial numbers. "If we sell some land the company owns, if we cancel the less profitable projects, and if we drastically reduce operating costs, we might be able to gather enough resources to properly compensate the families." What would that mean for the employees? Temporary salary cuts, staff reductions, cancellation of benefits. Will ran a hand through his hair, feeling the crushing weight of the decisions he had to make. There were no easy solutions, only difficult choices between different kinds of suffering. That night, he arrived home mentally exhausted. He found Sophia at the kitchen table doing homework. She had started attending a private school near his house, while Lily drew in a new notebook. "How was your day?" he asked, trying to set aside his work problems. "It was good," Lily said excitedly. "I learned to write my full name today." "Can you show me?" Lily proudly showed a sheet where she had written Lily Eleanor Santos in large, careful letters. "It's perfect," Will said, hugging her. "And you, Sophia, how was school?" "It was different," she said thoughtfully. "The other kids have very different lives from ours." "How so?" "They complain about things like having to share a room with a sibling or not being able to buy the sneakers they want. And I think about how we were just happy to have a room to sleep in." Will sat down next to her. "And how do you feel about that?" "I don't know. Sometimes I feel grateful for everything we have now. Sometimes I feel sad because other children will never understand what we went through. And sometimes I feel angry because what happened to us wasn't fair." "You have every right to feel angry," he said. "What happened to you was unfair." "But you're trying to fix it," Sophia said. "That counts for something." "I hope so." At that moment, the phone rang. It was Richard, calling from the office. "Will, you need to come here now. We have a situation." "What kind of situation?" "A journalist showed up here, Maria Rodriguez, from the Viridia Journal. She's asking questions about families that were harmed by our projects." Will's blood ran cold. "How did she find out?" "I don't know, but she has names, dates, specific details. Someone leaked information to her. I'm on my way." Will quickly explained to the girls that he had to solve a problem at work and left the house with his heart racing. During the drive to the office, his mind raced with the possible implications. If the story was published without context, it would be the end of Harrison Construction. When he arrived at the office, he found Maria Rodriguez in the waiting room. She was a woman of about 40, her hair tied in a ponytail, reading glasses perched on her nose, and a recorder on the table in front of her. "Mr. William Harrison." She stood up when she saw him. "I'm Maria Rodriguez from the Viridia Journal. I'd like to talk about some of your company's practices." "What exactly would you like to know?" "I'd like to know about the out-of-court settlements your company made with families whose homes were damaged by your constructions. I have information on at least 6 cases in the last 3 years." Will took a deep breath. The moment of truth had arrived. "May I ask who gave you this information?" "I can't reveal my sources, but I can say they are reliable." "Ms. Rodriguez, before you publish anything, I'd like you to know that I am conducting an internal investigation into these cases. We have discovered serious irregularities and are taking steps to correct them." "What kind of steps?" "We are locating all affected families to offer adequate compensation. We are implementing new safety protocols. And we are taking full responsibility for the mistakes made." Maria took notes quickly. "Is this an admission of guilt? It's an admission of responsibility, Will corrected. My company failed these families, and I will do everything in my power to repair that damage. And what if I tell you that one of these families is the family of Mrs. Eleanor Santos, whose house collapsed a few months ago and who is now in the hospital recovering from serious injuries? I would say that this family is being properly cared for. Mrs. Eleanor's granddaughters are living with me, all medical costs are being covered, and we are arranging permanent accommodation for when she recovers. Maria raised her eyebrows. The children are living with you? They are, and they are safe, well cared for, and attending school. Mr. Harrison, isn't it a bit irregular for a businessman to take home children affected by his company's problems? Perhaps it's irregular, but it was the right thing to do. Maria studied his face for a long moment. Can I talk to these children? Only if they agree, and only in the presence of a responsible adult. Deal. And can I visit Mrs. Eleanor at the hospital? If she agrees to speak with you, yes. Maria put away her recorder and made a few more notes. Mr. Harrison, off the record. Why are you doing all this? Why not just deny everything and move on? Will thought of Sophia and Lily at home, doing homework and drawing at the kitchen table. He thought of Mrs. Eleanor slowly recovering in the hospital. He thought of the 6-year-old girl from the Perez family with a permanent scar on her forehead. Because, he said, some things are more important than protecting a company. Some things are more important than protecting a reputation, and the suffering of innocent children is one of those things. Maria nodded slowly. I'm going to publish the story, Mr. Harrison, but I'll include everything, the mistakes made and the steps you're taking to correct them. That's fair, he said. It's more than fair. When Maria left, Will sat in his armchair and looked out the window at the city of Viridia. In a few days, everyone would know about his company's mistakes. Some would crucify him, others might respect his honesty. But for the first time in weeks, he felt at peace with his decisions. Maria Rodriguez's report was published on the front page of the Viridia Journal on a Thursday morning with the headline, Local Construction Company Admits Responsibility for Damages to Underprivileged Families. The article was extensive, detailed, and surprisingly balanced. Maria had interviewed 3 of the affected families, including a phone conversation with the father of the Perez family in Easton. Will read the report at the breakfast table while Sophia and Lily ate cereal. The girls noticed his tense expression. Did something bad happen? Sophia asked. Not exactly bad, he said, folding the newspaper, but complicated. The story about our company and about you was published in the newspaper. Are we in the newspaper? Lily asked, excited. You are. Maria wrote about how brave you were and how well you're recovering. Can I see? Sophia asked. Will hesitated, but decided she was old enough to understand. He showed her the report, watching as she read it silently. Wow, she said finally. She wrote about all the other families too. She did. And now everyone will know your company did wrong things? They will. Sophia studied his face carefully. Are you sorry you told the truth? No, not at all. Then it's okay. The phone started ringing at 8 in the morning and didn't stop. Clients cancelling contracts, suppliers worried about payments, employees wanting explanations. But not all the calls were negative. Some people called to praise his honesty. Others offered help for the affected families. When he arrived at the office, he found a crowd at the door. Journalists, curious onlookers, some of the families mentioned in the report. Richard was trying to control the situation, but was visibly overwhelmed. Mr. Harrison, a journalist shouted when he saw him, is it true your company will go bankrupt because of the compensation costs? I don't know yet, he answered honestly. But if we go bankrupt doing the right thing, it's better than thriving by doing the wrong thing. Mr. Harrison, a woman in the crowd shouted. He turned and saw a woman of about 50 approaching with tears in her eyes. He recognized her immediately from the photos he had seen. It was Carmen Perez, the mother of the girl who had been injured by the debris. "Mrs. Perez," he said, approaching her, "how is your daughter?" "She's fine. The scar is almost gone." Carmen wiped her eyes with a tissue. "I came here to thank you." "Thank me? I should be apologizing." "You are apologizing publicly, and you're taking responsibility. That's more than any other company has done for us." "It's not enough. I'd like to offer proper compensation for the pain we caused your family." "We don't want your money," Carmen said firmly. "We want other families not to go through what we went through, and from what you're saying in the newspaper, it seems you're going to ensure that." The conversation was interrupted by another man who approached. He was thin, about 40, with the calloused hands of a construction worker. "Are you William Harrison?" he asked. "I am." "I'm John Santos. My wife used to grow a vegetable garden in our backyard until your construction destroyed everything." Will braced himself for more accusations, but John continued in a surprisingly calm voice. "I want you to know that we understand it was an accident. We didn't come here to fight. We came because we want to work with you." "Work with me? I've been a bricklayer for 20 years. My wife is an excellent organizer. If you really want to make sure these things don't happen again, you need people who know the problems firsthand." The offer caught Will off guard. "You want to work for the company that destroyed your garden?" "We want to work for the company that is trying to fix its mistakes," John corrected. "That's rare these days." Over the next few hours, Will personally spoke with more than a dozen people. Some came to complain, others to offer support, some just out of curiosity. But the pattern that emerged surprised him. Most people respected his honesty. In the afternoon, he received an unexpected call. It was Dr. Evans from the hospital. "Mr. Harrison, you need to come here urgently." "Did something happen to Mrs. Eleanor?" "Not to her, but there's a situation you need to handle personally." When he arrived at the hospital, Dr. Evans took him to the pediatrics waiting room. "There's a family here asking to speak with you. They read the report in the newspaper and came from Maple Creek specifically for this." "Maple Creek? That's 2 hours from here." "It is. And they brought their daughter, who is the same age as Lily." Dr. Evans led him to where a family was waiting, a young couple and a small girl wearing a cast on her right arm. "Mr. Harrison," the man said, standing up, "I'm Charles Miller. This is my wife, Anna, and our daughter, Julia." "Nice to meet you. Dr. Evans said you wanted to talk to me." "We do," Anna said, holding her daughter in her lap. "Our Julia got hurt 2 months ago when part of our house's wall collapsed. We live near where a company from Viridia was building a commercial warehouse." Will's stomach sank. "And you think it might have been—" "We don't think," Charles said. "We're sure. We have photos of the cracks that appeared after the excavation started. We have records of our complaints that were ignored. And we have Julia's medical report." "Did you contact the company responsible?" "We tried, but we found out the company no longer exists. It went bankrupt a month ago, and the owner disappeared with all the assets." Anna spoke up, her voice choked with emotion. "When we read in the newspaper about you taking responsibility for the families affected by your company, we decided to come here. Not because we want money, but because we want to know if there's anyone in the construction business who actually cares about people. And we want our daughter to meet other children who have been through similar situations," Charles added, "so she doesn't feel alone." Will looked at little Julia, who was watching everything with large, curious eyes. She was the same age as Lily, had the same innocent look, but carried the weight of a traumatic experience. "Would you like to meet the girls who are living with me?" he asked. "Can we?" Anna asked hopefully. "Of course. and then we can talk about how I can help you, even though it's not technically my responsibility." 2 hours later, at Will's house, something magical happened. Julia and Lily connected immediately, playing together as if they were old friends. Sophia naturally took on the role of a protective older sister, including Julia in her games and conversations. "It's amazing," Anna commented, watching the children play in the garden. "Julia hasn't played like this since the accident. She was afraid of everything." "Children heal faster when they have other children who understand them," Carlos observed. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" Will offered. "And maybe spend the night. I know it was a long trip." "We don't want to bother." "You're not bothering. And honestly, after the day I've had, it would be nice to have a normal family at home." During dinner, the three children chatted excitedly, sharing stories and making plans to play the next day. The adults talked about corporate responsibility, how to protect vulnerable families, and the importance of communities supporting each other. "Mr. Harrison," Charles said after the children had gone to bed, "can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "Do you have children of your own?" "No." "Then why are you doing all this? Why take on all this responsibility for children who aren't even yours?" Will looked towards the hallway where the three girls had disappeared, talking and laughing softly. "Because maybe they are mine," he said. "Maybe not by blood, but by choice. And maybe that's what family really means, not who made us, but who we choose to protect." Anna smiled with tears in her eyes. "Our Julia was lucky to find you." "No," Will corrected. "I was the one who was lucky to find them." That night, when the house finally fell silent, Will sat on the porch and reflected on how his life had completely changed in just a few weeks. His company was facing a crisis, his reputation was being publicly questioned, and he had taken on responsibilities that could bankrupt his business. But for the first time in years, he felt truly useful. For the first time, he felt he was doing something that truly mattered. A week after the report was published, Will received a call that would change everything again. It was from a lawyer in Chicago named Robert Mendoza, who specialized in corporate law and class action lawsuits. "Mr. Harrison, I read about your company in the newspaper, and I need to speak with you urgently about a situation that could drastically affect your reparation plans." "What situation?" Will asked, already dreading the answer. "There's a group of investors from New York who are buying up all the debts and contracts of the families your company harmed. They intend to sue your construction company for amounts far exceeding what the families would have originally sought." Will felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. "What do you mean, buying the debts?" "It's a legal practice, but ethically questionable. They offer immediate cash to the families in exchange for the rights to sue for much larger amounts. The families get money on the spot, but they lose the right to negotiate directly with you. And this is legal? Completely legal and very profitable for them. I estimate they're seeking something between $15 and $20 million in damages." Will sat heavily in his chair. $20 million was more than 10 times the total value of his company. "Which families have already sold their rights? According to my information, 3 of the 6 families have already signed, including the Santos family who lost their garden. But John Santos offered me a job. He said he didn't want money." "Mr. Harrison, when someone offers $50,000 in cash to a family living on minimum wage, it's very hard to refuse, especially when they paint a picture that you might not have the resources to compensate them adequately." Will immediately understood the strategy. The investors had used his own honesty against him, convincing the families that it was better to accept guaranteed money than to trust his promises. "What can I do?" "Legally, very little. The contracts have already been signed. But there's something else you need to know." "What?" "One of the people involved in this operation is Caroline Vance." The world seemed to stop around Will. "What do you mean?" She provided detailed information about your company's financial situation, about the affected families, and about your reparation plans. That's what allowed the investors to act so quickly and with such precision. Will stood up abruptly, feeling a fury he hadn't experienced in years. She betrayed me. It seems so, and there's more. According to my sources, she received a significant commission for this information. Where is she now? I believe in New York, working directly for the investment group. Will hung up the phone and stood for a few minutes just looking out the window, trying to process the betrayal. Caroline had worked for him for 15 years. He had trusted her with confidential information, with important financial decisions, with his own personal life, and she had used it all against him. The phone rang again. It was Sophia calling from school. Uncle Will, there's a lady here at school asking about us. She says she works for a law firm and wants to talk to us about the company. Don't talk to her, Will said immediately. Don't talk to anyone who isn't me, Mrs. Rosa, or Dr. Evans. I'm coming to get you now. When he arrived at the school, he found a young woman in a suit talking to the principal. She introduced herself as a legal assistant and explained that she represented the girls' interests in a potential lawsuit against Harrison Construction. The children don't need legal representation, Will said firmly. They are already being properly cared for. Mr. Harrison, these children are entitled to significant financial compensation for the trauma they've suffered. We're talking about amounts that would guarantee their university education, a financially secure future. And how much of that money would you keep? The woman hesitated. Our fee is standard for cases like this. How much? 40%. Will took Sophia and Lily by the hand. The girls don't need lawyers. They have a safe home, a guaranteed education, and all the support they need. But sir, this conversation is over. In the car, Sophia asked the question Will had been dreading. Uncle Will, what's happening? Why are so many people wanting to talk to us about money? Because, he explained carefully, there are people who want to use your story to make money, even if it means hurting other people. Including you. Including me. But we don't want to hurt you, Lily said from the back seat. You take care of us. I know, little one, and I will always take care of you, no matter what happens. That night, after the girls were asleep, Will received an unexpected visit. It was John Santos, the man who had offered to work for him on the morning the report was published. Mr. Harrison, he said, clearly embarrassed, I need to talk to you. Come in, John. Want some coffee? No, thank you. I came here to explain why we signed those papers. Will poured himself a coffee and sat across from John in the living room. You don't need to explain. I understand the situation. No, I do. Because you trusted us and we were scared. Scared of what? Scared that your company wouldn't survive all this. Scared that you wouldn't be able to keep the promises you made. When those lawyers showed up with $50,000 in cash, my wife started crying. John paused, wiping his eyes. Do you know how long it's been since we've seen $50,000 together? Never. And they said if we waited, we might not get anything. I understand, John, I really do. But now I feel horrible, because you're trying to do the right thing, and we kind of sabotaged that. You did what you thought was best for your family. I can't criticize that. John leaned forward. Is there any way to cancel what we signed, to go back? I don't know. I'd have to consult a lawyer. Because if there is, I want to cancel. I'd rather work with you to fix things than let those vultures take advantage of the situation. At that moment, the phone rang. It was Dr. Evans from the hospital. Mr. Harrison, Mrs. Eleanor is asking to speak with you urgently. She said she's discovered something important. I'm on my way. Will explained the situation to John, who asked to accompany him to the hospital. During the drive, John told him how the investors had approached his family. "They knew everything about us," he said. "They knew how much my wife earned cleaning. They knew about my mother's health problems. They knew we were behind on rent. How did they get that information?" "Someone from inside my company provided it," Will admitted. "Caroline, how do you know?" "Because she was there when we signed the papers. She was helping the lawyers explain the terms of the contract." Caroline's betrayal was proving to be even deeper than Will had imagined. She hadn't just provided information, she had actively participated in manipulating the families. At the hospital, they found Mrs. Eleanor more alert than ever. Her speech was almost completely recovered, and she could move her right arm with much more ease. "Will," she said as soon as she saw them, "I need to tell you something important." "What is it, Mrs. Eleanor?" "I remembered more things about the day of the collapse." "What things?" "There was a man filming our house the morning before it fell." Will and John looked at each other. "Filming with what?" Will asked. "A cell phone or a small camera. He was across the street, filming the cracks." "Would you recognize this man if you saw him again?" "I would, yes." "Mrs. Eleanor," John said carefully, "was this man alone or with someone?" "He was, with a woman, with blonde hair." Will's blood ran cold. Caroline had blonde hair. "Do you remember anything else about this woman?" "She spoke with a neighbor, asking when we usually left the house." The implication was clear and terrifying. Caroline and someone else had been at the scene before the collapse, documenting the cracks and investigating the family's habits. It hadn't just been negligence, it had been premeditated. "Mrs. Eleanor," Will said with a trembling voice, "what you're telling me changes everything. If it's true, it is." "True," she said firmly. "And there's one more thing." "What?" "The neighbor said the woman asked specifically about the girls. She wanted to know their school schedules." Will felt as if the world was collapsing around him. If Caroline had investigated the family's habits before the collapse, if she had documented the cracks in advance, this was no longer corporate negligence. It was something much, much worse. The discovery that Caroline had investigated Mrs. Eleanor's house before the collapse kept Will awake all night. In the morning, he made a decision that would change the course of everything. He would go to the Viridia Police Department to report his suspicions. If premeditation was involved, this was no longer just a corporate matter. It was a judicial one. But before going to the police, he needed more evidence. He called Richard and asked him to meet at the construction company's office to review all the files related to the Hope's Landing project. "Richard," he said when he arrived at the office, "I need you to help me find any evidence that Caroline knew in advance about the structural risks of Mrs. Eleanor's house." "Will, are you sure you want to get into this? If there really is premeditation, then I'd rather find out now than be surprised later." They spent 3 hours rummaging through files, emails, and financial documents. That's when Richard found something that made Will's blood run cold. "Look at this," Richard said, showing a series of emails dated a week before the collapse. Caroline hired an independent structural assessment company to verify possible risks in properties adjacent to the Hope's Landing project. An independent company. Why would she do that without consulting me? I don't know. But look here, she specifically asked them to assess the residential property of Eleanor Santos, located at 247 Oakwood Street. She specifically asked them to assess Mrs. Eleanor's house. She did, and look at the date of the report. Will looked at the document Richard had found. The independent company's report was dated 2 days before the collapse and concluded that Mrs. Eleanor's house presented an imminent structural risk due to the vibrations and excavations of the adjacent project. "My God," Will murmured. She knew exactly what was going to happen. "And look down here. The report recommends immediate evacuation of residents and urgent structural reinforcement." And she did nothing. Not only did she do nothing, but look at this email here. Richard showed an email that Caroline had sent to the assessment company the day after receiving the report. "We thank you for the services provided. For information security reasons, we ask that you consider this report confidential and do not make copies or keep records of it." Will sat down heavily in his chair. She tried to hide the report. She tried and succeeded. If it weren't for an automatic backup on the server that she didn't know existed, we never would have found this. "Richard, this isn't negligence. This is criminal recklessness. She knew people could get hurt and chose not to act." At that moment, the phone rang. It was Maria Rodriguez, the journalist. "Mr. Harrison, I received an anonymous call about your former employee, Caroline Vance. The person said there's evidence that she knew about structural risks in advance and did nothing to prevent accidents." "Who called?" "I don't know. It was a male voice, but the call was quick. The person just said I should investigate the contracts Caroline signed with structural assessment companies in the weeks leading up to the accidents." Will looked at Richard. "Does anyone else know about this?" "Just the two of us now." "So who called Maria?" The answer came 2 hours later when Michael Torres showed up at the office unannounced. He was visibly nervous and carried a folder full of documents. "Will, I'm the one who called the journalist," he admitted, "and I came here to turn over everything I know about Caroline's involvement." "What exactly do you know?" "I know she knew about the risks. I know she had technical reports warning of dangers, and I know she deliberately chose not to act." Michael opened the folder and spread documents across the table. "When you confronted me last week, I decided to investigate on my own. I managed to get access to the emails Caroline sent me over the last 3 years, and I discovered something terrible." "What?" "She wasn't just cutting costs. She was deliberately choosing projects in areas where she knew old houses could be affected." Will looked at the documents Michael was showing. They were detailed maps of the neighborhoods where the construction company had worked, with specific markings of properties that could suffer structural damage. Why would she do that? "Because of this," Michael said, showing a series of contracts. "Caroline had secret agreements with demolition and earth-moving companies. Whenever an old house was damaged by our projects, she directed the cleanup and rubble removal service to these companies. And she received a commission. She did. 20% of the value of each demolition service." Richard took one of the contracts and studied the details. "This means the more houses were damaged by our projects, the more money she made." "Exactly. And when the families came to complain, she offered small settlements that were much smaller than the profit she made from the demolition." Will felt a rising nausea. "Are you telling me that Caroline deliberately caused damage to houses to profit from the rubble cleanup?" "Not only caused, but planned," Michael said. "Look here, she kept a list of target properties for each new project. The list Michael showed contained 23 addresses over 3 years. Mrs. Eleanor's house was marked as high priority, vintage structure, low-income residence, strategic location." "Strategic location for what?" Will asked. "For the construction of a commercial parking lot. Look at this project she was developing in parallel." Michael showed architectural plans for a commercial parking lot that would be built exactly where Mrs. Eleanor's house and two neighboring houses stood. She was planning to buy the land after the houses were damaged. Not buy. She had already bought it. Through a shell company she created, the plan was to damage the houses, force the residents to move, demolish everything, and build the parking lot. The revelation hit Will like a lightning bolt. Caroline had not only neglected the family's safety, she had deliberately conspired to destroy their homes and profit from it. "Where is the evidence for this?" he asked. "Here," Michael said, handing over a flash drive. "All the emails, all the contracts, all the maps, all the financial documents, everything." "Why did you keep all this?" "Because from the beginning I found it strange how Caroline always knew exactly which houses would have problems. And because I was documenting everything to protect myself in case things went wrong." Will inserted the flash drive into the computer and began to review the files. Each document painted a darker picture of Caroline's conspiracy. There were detailed reports on the financial situation of each target family, studies on which residents would be most likely to accept small settlements, even psychological analyses on how to approach each victim. "This is monstrous," he said finally. "It is, and there's more. Caroline wasn't working alone." "What do you mean?" "She had partners. The group of investors from New York that is suing your company now, they were part of the scheme from the beginning." Michael showed emails between Caroline and representatives of the investment group dating back 2 years, long before the accidents began. They planned to cause the accidents, offer small settlements to the victims, and then buy the rights from those victims to sue your company for huge amounts. Exactly. It was a double scheme. They profited from both the demolition and the subsequent lawsuits. And I was the scapegoat. You were the owner of the company that would be held responsible for the accidents. They calculated that you wouldn't be able to prove premeditation, so you would be forced to pay huge damages or go bankrupt trying. Will stood up and walked to the window, trying to process the magnitude of the betrayal. For 15 years, he had trusted Caroline with his company, his finances, his decisions. And all that time, she had been planning his destruction. "What do we do now?" Richard asked. "Now we go to the police," Will said, grabbing the flash drive and the printed documents. "This is no longer a civil matter, it's a criminal one." "And the families?" Michael asked. "And the children?" "The families will be told the truth, and if there's any justice in this world, Caroline and her partners will pay for every life they've destroyed." When they arrived at the Viridia Police Department, Detective Robert Silver received them with initial skepticism that quickly turned to shock as he reviewed the evidence. "Gentlemen," he said after an hour of analyzing documents, "what you've brought here constitutes a complex criminal operation. I'll need to open an investigation immediately." "How long does an investigation like this take?" Will asked. "With this evidence? A few weeks to formalize the charges, but you understand that this will expose your company to even more public scrutiny?" "I understand, but I'd rather the truth be known, even if it's painful." When they left the police station, Will felt simultaneously relieved and terrified. Relieved because there was finally evidence that he was not a negligent businessman, but a victim of an elaborate conspiracy. Terrified because it meant that Sophia, Lily, and Mrs. Eleanor had not been victims of an accident, but of a deliberate scheme. "Richard," he said in the parking lot, "I want you to prepare a full report on all of this for the affected families. They deserve to know the truth." "And what if the truth is even more painful than the lie?" "Then we'll help them deal with that pain. But at least it will be the truth." That night, when he told Sophia and Lily an age-appropriate version of what he had discovered, the girl's reaction surprised him. "You mean Aunt Caroline made our house fall down on purpose?" Sophia asked. It seems so. Why? To make money. Lily was silent for a long moment, then said, "She must be very sad inside to do something like that. The compassion of a 4-year-old for someone who had deliberately destroyed her family left Will speechless." 6 months after the discovery of Caroline's conspiracy, Viridia witnessed one of the most talked about trials in its history. Caroline Vance and her partners from the New York investment group were being prosecuted for racketeering, fraud, property damage, and bodily harm. The case had gained national attention, becoming a symbol of corporate corruption and unbridled greed. Will was in the courtroom on that cold September morning, accompanied by Sophia and Lily, now 13 and 5, respectively. Mrs. Eleanor, fully recovered and walking with only a slight limp and a cane, sat beside them. The Perez family had traveled from Easton to testify, as had all the other families affected by the conspiracy. "Are you sure you want to be here for this?" Will asked the girls before they entered the courtroom. "We do," Sophia said firmly. "We need to hear the whole truth. And we want to see if Aunt Caroline will say she's sorry," Lily added, still retaining her childish ability to hope for the best in people. When Caroline entered the courtroom in handcuffs, the silence was absolute. The woman who had been the respected administrative manager of Harrison Construction for 15 years now looked like a stranger. Graying hair, face marked by stress, eyes that avoided any direct contact with the victims of her schemes. Judge Carl Matthews, an experienced 60-year-old magistrate, conducted the trial with impeccable rigor. For 3 days, witnesses paraded through the court, victims telling their stories, engineers explaining how the houses were deliberately damaged, investigators presenting the financial evidence. It was on the 3rd day that something no one expected happened. Caroline asked to make a final statement before sentencing. "Your Honor," she said, rising with difficulty, "I would like to confess something that is not in the record." The murmur in the courtroom was immediate. Her lawyer tried to stop her, but she continued. "I didn't start this scheme out of greed," she said, her voice trembling. "I started it out of desperation." "Explain," the judge said. 8 years ago, my youngest son was diagnosed with leukemia. The treatment cost more than $50,000 a month, and our insurance didn't cover it. I was desperate." Will leaned forward in his chair. In 15 years working together, Caroline had never mentioned having a sick child. "That's when the investors from New York approached me. They knew about my situation and offered a solution. If I helped identify vulnerable properties that could be accidentally damaged, they would pay for my son's treatment." "And you accepted?" the judge stated. "I accepted, because when you have a dying child, you do anything to save them." Tears began to stream down Caroline's face. But one thing led to another. They wanted more information, more properties, more victims, and I got lost in the process. Will looked at Lily, who was watching Caroline with intense focus. "Where is your son now?" the judge asked. "He died 2 years ago," Caroline replied, her voice breaking completely. "After 6 years of treatment, he died anyway. And I destroyed the lives of innocent families for nothing." The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Even the prosecutors seemed moved by the revelation. "Why did you never tell me about your son?" Will asked, standing up. Caroline finally looked directly at him. "Because I was ashamed. Because you were always a good boss, and I knew you would have helped if I had asked. But pride stopped me from asking for help, and greed made me accept dirty money." "Is there anything else you'd like to say?" the judge asked. "Yes, I would like to apologize to all the families I harmed, especially to Mrs. Eleanor and her granddaughters. You didn't deserve to go through this." Caroline turned to where Lily was sitting. "And you, little Lily, who were always so kind, even when your life was destroyed. I hope you can forgive me one day." To everyone's surprise, Lily got up from her chair and walked to where Caroline stood. "I forgive you," she said simply, "because you were trying to save your little boy, and because you're sad now." The gesture of a 5-year-old forgiving someone who had deliberately destroyed her family touched everyone present. Even some of the jurors were visibly emotional. 3 hours later, the judge delivered the sentence: 8 years in prison for Carolyn, 12 years for the leaders of the investment scheme, and total compensation of $15 million for the affected families. "Justice cannot fully restore the damage done," the judge said in his final statement, "but it can ensure that the victims are adequately compensated and that the guilty pay for their actions." When they left the courthouse, Mrs. Eleanor walked beside Will in silence for a few minutes. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Relieved," she said, "but also sad for her." "For Caroline?" "Yes, because I understand the desperation of a mother trying to save her child. I would have done anything to protect my granddaughters." "But you wouldn't have hurt other families in the process." "No, but maybe because I was never tested the way she was." 2 weeks later, Will received an unexpected letter from the prison where Caroline was being held. In the letter, she revealed the location of a secret bank account containing unreported money from the schemes, asking that the amount be distributed among the affected families. "Why did she do that?" Sophia asked when Will told her about the letter. "Maybe because she finally understood that doing the right thing was more important than protecting herself. Or maybe," said Lily, "because forgiving makes people want to be better." At the end of that month, something extraordinary happened. With the money recovered from Caroline's schemes and the court-ordered compensation, Will was able not only to adequately compensate all the affected families, but also to implement an innovative social construction program in Viridia. The new Harrison Construction, renamed Hope Builders, began to work exclusively on housing projects for low-income families, always with the participation of the communities themselves in the planning and execution. John Santos, who had cancelled his agreement with the investors as soon as he learned the truth, became a site supervisor. Michael Torres, redeemed by his final honesty, was hired as chief engineer. And Charles and Anna Miller moved from Maple Creek to Viridia, where Charles took on the role of safety coordinator for all projects. "It's funny," Sophia commented one night, as they did their homework at the kitchen table, "how something so bad in the beginning turned into something so good in the end." "It wasn't the bad thing that turned good," Will corrected. "It was the people who chose to do good things even after bad things happened to them." "Like what?" "Like you forgiving me even though I was part of the problem. Like Mrs. Eleanor choosing to trust me even after everything she went through. Like Michael choosing to tell the truth even though he knew it would be hard for him." Lily, now 5 and much more talkative, looked up from her drawing. "And like Aunt Caroline giving back the money even though she's in prison." "Exactly. Daddy Will," she said. She'd started calling him that naturally. "Do you think we'll visit Aunt Caroline in prison one day?" The question caught Will off guard. "Why would you want to visit her?" "Because maybe she's lonely, and because she lost her little boy, so she must be very sad." Will looked at that 5-year-old girl who had been through traumas that would scar any adult, but who still maintained a capacity for compassion that impressed him daily. "If you want to visit her when you're older, we can talk about it. Promise." "I promise." That night, after the girls were asleep, Will sat on the porch of the house in the estates, the same house where it had all begun, and reflected on how his life had completely changed. A year ago, he was a lonely businessman focused only on profit. Now, he was the father of 2 extraordinary girls, the leader of a company with a social purpose, and part of a community that had come together to overcome adversity. The greatest lesson he had learned was not about corporate responsibility or social justice, though those were important. The greatest lesson was about the human capacity to choose love over fear, compassion over revenge, construction over destruction. Sophia and Lily had taught him that family is not about blood, but about choice. Mrs. Eleanor had shown him that forgiveness is not weakness but strength, and even Caroline, in her final moments of honesty, had demonstrated that it's never too late to do the right thing. As he watched the stars over Viridia, Will smiled, thinking that his story had begun with the sound of desperate screams, but had evolved into the sound of children's laughter echoing through the halls of his home. Sometimes he thought life's greatest blessings come disguised as the greatest tragedies, and sometimes all we need to find our true family is to be brave enough to open our door when someone is asking for help.